So the complete cloud storage portfolio at Amazon. Everyone know about S3 and EBS? Show of hands. I'm sure we've all used S3 and EBS. It's been around the industry a very long time. We have much more than that. Starting the left with Object, Amazon S3 has become a standard of sorts in the industry, a convention accepted by many vendors and many customers out there just because of the capability of it. It's not just object storage, it's object storage with an entire ecosystem of web services built around it. That's the beauty of S3 in this case, and we do have that. Block, we have Amazon EBS, a very capable block storage. Dynamic, you can have all kinds of performance profiles for your LUNs, your block devices, and grow them and shrink them and take snaps of them on the fly. For file, we have Amazon EFS. EFS is really good for dynamic creation and elastic content. So if you need a file system on the fly, dynamically in your application, and you need to store data and you don't know if it's going to be 1 terabyte or 1 petabyte, EFS is a great choice for that. Then we have our FSX line. So FSX started about 4 or 5 years ago, I believe 2017, Jay, we were talking about when we had customers saying, hey, for the EFS offering, we don't have a CIFS SMB client for it. Can you build a CIFS interface for EFS? And then our engineering went back and came up with Amazon FSX for Windows. And it is a Windows service. It's a managed service that runs in the cloud. You consume it, you set up backups. You don't have to do any administration outside of quota management, Ntfs permissions. You can get it in many different performance profiles too, all SSD or HDD, whatever you need. Recently announced, we have Amazon FSX for Netapp on tap, very popular. It filled some niches in our product portfolio that weren't there before. And on-premises customers that use Netapp on tap are very comfortable with this transition because they move over and it is Netapp on tap running on Amazon. FSX for OpenZFS, this is also new. So we do have an OpenZFS solution today. It's a very, very well performant. It works nice in the space that it is. And customers are going to say, well, why do you have FSX for Netapp on tap and ZFS? Why would you have both? Well, because 95% of the roadmap at Amazon comes from our customers. And this is what happened in this case. Customers asked for it, and we built it, and they are using it. And I mentioned the FSX for Windows file server. Lots of different options on the file front. And FSX is a generic framework that other third parties can also integrate with. So in the future, there could be other file systems for other popular names that are out there based on customer demand. AWS Backup is relatively new, but also very popular. We recently announced AWS Backup for S3. So people say, why would you back up S3? Well, disasters do happen. Sometimes it happens with the technology and the infrastructure. Sometimes it happens with personnel. Sometimes there's bad perpetrators that get in environments and do bad things, right? So now we have an entire AWS backup infrastructure that we have vaults where your data can be locked down and easily managed and audited, integrated with our audit management software, so you can check that everybody who has this tag, the gold tag, the silver tag, is indeed backing up at your SLA. On the bottom, least but not forgotten, is the data transfer and migration suite of applications. So show of hands, please. How many of you know about the AWS Storage Gateway? Okay, so about, I'd say 10, 15%. So the Storage Gateway is a hybrid device that can run on premises. You could run it in a hardware appliance. You could run it in a virtual machine in VMware or Hyper-V or KVM, if that's your choice. And with it, you can get low latency experience on premises for data that is stored in AWS Cloud. The S3 Storage Gateway, one of the most popular ones out there, will allow customers to write data either through NFS or SMB and persist it as S3 objects in S3. Guess what the quota is? I think it's 8 exabytes by default with the Storage Gateway when you go set it up. I don't have anybody with 8 exabytes of data behind it, but that's what you're going to see. It's virtually a limitless bucket behind it. Some of the genomics customers that are out there will store a lot of genomics data behind it because they need to store it in S3 for analytical purposes. And it's very archival in nature. They have lots and billions of these files, but they don't need to pull it back through to the gateway. So they have their sequencers or whatever right to it over NFS or SMB, depending on which one we're talking about, persist it to an S3 object, and then they can do their analytics on it in EC2. Very popular. We have other gateways. We're going to talk about those. AWS Data Sync. This is our data migration tool, a very powerful, capable tool to migrate data from on-premises to the cloud. AWS Transfer Family. This is a very powerful tool that can replace an entire MFT system in your environment, managed file transfer. Do you have FTP servers, SFTP servers, working with data going back and forth with banks or other institutions? Well, that's where Transfer Family comes in. It fills a niche in the market where a lot of customers have built their own or bought a solution to do it. This is integrated with the AWS suite of storage services. Snowball, we have everything from a Snowball Edge to a Snow Cone, a small little SSD device that you can ship, copy data to it, ship it back to Amazon, and we'll load your data up right into the cloud. And Snow Cone, that's the other one there. All right, I'll take this.
So when you have such a wide variety of services, especially when you've been in the industry for quite some time, you develop a lot of services that might seem like they intertwine. They might seem like they are very similar. Some of them are polar opposites. So the way that you get to the decision-making process is by asking yourself a lot of questions, right? A lot of customers come to us, they say, hey, I need a multi-protocol access system. And then the question is, do you really need multi-protocol? Do you really need to be able to access that file system from multiple different endpoints? Which are your mission critical applications, right? Which are the crown jewels of your application? Is it the code? Is it everything? At the beginning, whenever you start a conversation about, let's say, disaster recovery or what it is that you need on your premium systems, everyone from a higher level might come up and say everything. But usually that's not the case, especially when you start talking about the cost as to how much it's going to cost you to move something, to protect something, to make sure that something can go live within a day in case something tragic happens the day before. So questions such as these are actually some that we might be able to answer for you today. And if there's any questions that you might want to ask us, that you might be on the fence about, or of the services that Kevin actually talked about before, that's the purpose of this next hour that we're going to spend together.
Let me add something on the multi-protocol there, just being specific. A lot of customers come to us and say they need multi-protocol. And when we have a conversation with them, they need multiple protocols. We got that. And so multi-protocol is a very specific thing where you have a file that's shared out both SMB and NFS at the same time. And there's a security mechanism in place that needs to be configured and managed. Actually, it's more of a unique thing to find that out there. And when you talk to them about why they're doing that, typically you're going to find out that there's some users that are comfortable with maybe SMB and not NFS. And so it's a nice to have. And there's many ways to accomplish that. Of course, we can do multi-protocol all day long with FSx on tap, but that's a very specific use case here. And another one here I'm going to jump to here is the AWS doesn't offer deduplication capability. I can tell you this. One thing that AWS does do is find ways to save money for our customers at scale. And I believe since its inception in 2006, there's been 106 pricing reductions passed down to the customers, if I have it correct. So the number might have been updated recently. But with deduplication, even if we came out with that on a technology, it is likely going to be passed down to the customer in one way, fashion, or another. But that's not what's important at the end of the day. It's going to be, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish with this capability?
Right. So with that being said, what does your environment look like, right? So starting off on the top left, starting off the top left again, right? So protocol. What kind of file system do you need? Do you need SMB or do you need NFS? Or is it a block application that you're looking to sustain, right? Client type. Is your workload primarily going to be accessed from Windows or going to be accessed by Unix? The next few blocks here, IOPS, access patterns, latency, throughput, or bandwidth, that all tail ends into the conversation about performance, which is a drastically important conversation to have before you deploy an environment, right? How much latency can your application withstand, right? How many milliseconds? Does it have to be sub-milliseconds? Can you take 20 milliseconds to be able to perform at a rate that your customers are going to be happy with, right? What does your application require, right? Every single application out there, most of them have some kind of list as to the way that they would like to be handled when it comes to your environment and the way you deploy it. Geographic scale and data sovereignty, right? Where is your data going to be located, right? What regions do you want to replicate to if you do want to replicate? Do you need to have your data cross-country? Are you allowed to have that data cross-country? A migration strategy, which is critically important when you're coming from the on-premises world, especially, right? How are you going to get that data from your on-premises environment onto the cloud? And of course, a conversation that is eventually had normally at the tail end of discussions is how do you want to back it up? How do you want to protect it? It's not the most, usually the most exciting process to talk about how you're going to protect your data, but it is very, very critical along the same lines as disaster recovery. What is your RPO? What is your RTO? Right? Those are things that you might actually have already defined for your on-premises environment. But when it comes to migrating onto the cloud, the discussion might actually be different, right? Security is a layered process. At AWS, it's a shared process, right? We will protect the cloud and then we will allow you to apply however many layers that you would like on top of that for you to be able to secure your data, to make sure that no bad actors penetrate your environment or any kind of feature threat that might come around the corner. Applications, you might want to encompass that block at the bottom left as the goal of all the rest of the blocks that are in front of you, right? What is it that we're providing for you? We're providing services that are going to eventually satisfy some kind of application, which then somehow fits your business needs, right? That puts into discussion the workflow, the cost optimization strategies, which, as Kevin has mentioned before, we do have systems in place that whenever we do offer a new service that's in line with the service that you're using right now, can enjoy some kind of discount. And we do have a few stories to tell when it comes to offering new services or new object classes in specific use cases that might actually reduce the cost without you even having to lift a finger, right? And then cloud native layered services, right? Do you want to be born in the cloud? Do you want to use services that are for the cloud, or do you want to bring in services that are from your on-premises world onto the cloud and adapt them? So any questions that you all might have, please let us know based on all these decision criteria.
Let me add just one thing here. Cost optimization strategies. I am just amazed at how many customers that I talked to since I've been at AWS that have huge amount of data in S3, and it's all in standard. And when you talk to them about it, they're, a lot of the data is archival. They don't reference it. They're not aware of it. We have this thing called S3 Storage Lens. It's free to use. You can pull it up. You can get 15 metrics out of the gate, and it'll do an analysis on your S3 storage and let you know where there are opportunities for improvement. I worked with an M&E customer not long ago, and we were able to save them $500,000 a year in annual recurring revenue just by having a different strategy. We moved them to S3 int in that case, and based on their access patterns, it made a lot of sense. We're going to get into that, and we took way too long, so let's go to the next slide. So this is the magic slide, the money slide. This is the choose your own adventure game. So these 5 are hyperlinks. We can go into any topic that the audience wants. We can have any kind of conversations, but migration for your existing applications into the cloud, backing up data to the cloud, hybrid, using cloud storage with on-premises applications, building a data link, and building a new application. So anybody in the audience would like to steer the direction of the conversation? This is a customer-driven conversation. Which way? Which way would you like to go? Scenario 1. Okay. All right. Let's jump down this route.
Okay, so there's 2 paths that you can take. You can start net new, or you can forklift into AWS, or you can do a sort of a hybrid between the two, right? So When it comes to migrating your applications, there's two sub-scenarios, right? So existing applications with data that's on a SAN, so block level, right? And then there's also existing applications that are on the NAS side of the house, right? So there's a massive difference, or they're within the same family when it comes to the different protocols, but they are used very, very differently. When it comes to block, AWS offers a service called EBS, in which case we have quite a number of different types when it comes to the performance that you'd like to take advantage of. On the bottom left, we have actually a brand new service, well, brand new in general, right, within the past year. It's Iot Block Express when you're looking for provisioned IOPS at a super fast performant rate, right? So if you have an application that's looking to guarantee to have some millisecond response times and it's performance critical, Iot Block Express would be the way to go.
You're talking 256,000 IOPS and 4 gigabytes per second of throughput in a 64 terabyte namespace. It is very powerful, very capable.
Right. So, and then on top of that, we also have, that's at the top, right? So let's move down. Let's, not every application is going to need that kind of performance, right? And that's some of those questions that can lead to cost reductions, right? There is the world of general purpose. There's a lot of applications out there that don't need that bleeding edge kind of performance, right? So we have GP3 and GP2 out there that can work as, let's say, middle of the road, right? Sometimes it's burstable, sometimes it's not, depending on what kind of performance you're looking for, as a system where your performance will increase depending on the amount of capacity that you require, right? On top of that, we have provisioned IOPS, IO2. IO2 Block Express is kind of like a step up, but IO2 is provisioned IOPS. You know how much performance you need out of these block devices. So just go ahead and choose that service and then just deploy it onto your EC2 device, right? If you don't need SSD, if you don't need that kind of performance, let's say you're perfectly fine with a spindle drive. With magnetic drives, we also offer ST1 and ST1. So that's of course for, let's say, for your lower latency applications, the ones that you don't need that much performance for.
All right, but then there's file systems. So
Wait, there's one more block device.
do we leave one out, Jay? When do we leave out?
FSX for on-tap offers Aws Skill Builder.
So our friend Jay over here on the left-hand side, he happens to be one of the service-aligned SAs that work with FSX for Netapp. So if there is any deep Netapp questions that you all would like to have, Jay is actually in the room and he is able to help out. So FSX for Netapp does offer iSCSI. So if you're looking for a block device from a Netapp device, if that's the way you're familiar with, and actually I think we touch on that in the next slide.
Oh, sorry. Jumped ahead. I would just add, so for your database workloads, I point my customers towards Iot Block Express for most database workloads in general. If you have a database that requires rapid cloning of multiple clones, copies of your database very, very quickly, FSX for on-tap offers a really good solution for that. You can spin up what they call flex clones inside of that environment, and you can spin them off of their own namespace, their own space, where you can leave them a local way, use them transitory nature. It offers a huge amount of performance for customers that just need rapid cloning of development and test environments specifically.
Yep. And if you're using it on premises today, it makes total sense to move your scripts right into FSX for Netapp running in the cloud. It works. So, I mean, you have to modify the script a little bit, but it works.
So here's where I'm going to bring out a little laser, because this is a very, very big discussion point. So on the left-hand side, Kevin did a pretty good explanation as to how Amazon EFS works, right? It's been around for a while, right? If you need a set and forget kind of NFS file system, EFS is the way to go, right? If you're looking to have a high-capacity storage area, EFS is the way to go. Now, that leaves us with FSX. FSX stands for File System X, right? And what happened is, and in the industry, Amazon did realize that there's a lot of tried and true systems out there, or manufacturers, or just deployments that customers have a wide adoption for. So it's been around forever, it's reliable, and customers love it. So what we did was we decided to create an environment called File System X, right? The X stands for the following, right? Either the Netapp, the Windows, the Lustre, or the OpenZFS. right? And what happens is that it does not encapsulate the service, right? It doesn't put it in a box and then says, here, this is yours, you go ahead and use it. It actually integrates it into AWS environments so that you can use, and here's the benefit of it. If you're used to managing it from its native systems, let's take Netapp for example. Let's say you have Cloud Manager or you have the CLI for Netapp. You feel free to continue managing it the same exact way. Now, on top of that, AWS command line has been integrated into these services. So if you have APIs that you'd like to learn through AWS, or maybe you just like to use the AWS GUI, you can and you should do so, right? Just to learn the different ways of using it.
For the Windows file server, does it support our on-prem AD, or does it have to be an Amazon directory service?
That is a great question. It could be either. It just needs a network route to get to an Active Directory that is a modern functional one. I forget the minimum requirements, but it's very flexible. But you do have to set up the networking needed to get back to on-premises. As long as we can talk to 445 and the ports that we need, it's good.
Yeah, so if you deploy a domain controller based off of your tree onto your VPC, you can just tie it to that one and you're off to the races.
Think of it as a managed Windows server in the cloud for you, that you are just a consumer of the SMB shares and you can manage it through MMC just like you would on premises. Mm-hmm. It's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So you can definitely manage it through Active Directory the same exact way. You could use the GUI to deploy it. All right, so that's a pretty good jump off point, right? A FSX for Windows is a native Windows file system, so you can just use it the same exact way that you're used to. FSX for OpenZFS is a ultra fast, super fast NFS mount that is for low latency applications that require an NFS mount. Lustre is for scale out performance. So if you need something that's multi-threaded, going to be accessed from multiple different endpoints at the same time, and you need it to be performant, FSX for Lustre would be the proper way to move forward. So just as a quick recap, EFS would be NFS for high capacity. FSX for Netapp ONTAP is really multifaceted. It has multiple different use cases, but part of that is it has SMB, NFS, multi-protocol, and iSCSI. Windows file server is a native file system for Windows, right? And then OpenZFS and Lustre are both NFS based, and OpenZFS would be for your ultra fast applications that require super fast file systems. And then FSX for Lustre, think scale out. If you're going to have multiple users accessing an NFS file mount, this is the way to go.
And one added benefit for Amazon's FSX for Lustre is the data can be stored in S3 and leveraged in S3 as objects with other applications. Very powerful. We have a lot of customers that are interested in using FSX for Lustre that are not in the traditional HPC space because they found opportunities that made a lot of sense for their business and they sped things up. All right, let's go back to the choose your own adventure. Who wants to slay the dragon? Anybody? Yes, sir. No. What we're saying here is Varonis is supported for Amazon FSX for ONTAP as well. We're not saying it's not supported with anything else. We're just saying in this case it is. So yep, Varonis works great with Isilon and other products. They're not in the cloud as an FSX right now. ONTAP is. Okay, that's a good question. All right, so we could steer this.
Any other questions before?
Yes, thank you. On that last slide, just curious, show of hands in the audience. Do you find yourself struggling with figuring out which file solution to work in Amazon? Or is it the kind of thing you pull up and it just helps you guide to a solution? Show of hands, do you struggle at all or have you struggled in the past year? It's okay if you have, okay. A few people? All right, very good. Thanks for that. All right. I do too. I did too, so okay.
So that was migrations. Do you guys have tools to migrate from file system to file system?
So yes, actually we do. So depending on what kind of migration you'd like to do, whether if it's from on-premises to the AWS cloud or even within the AWS cloud to cloud, we do offer services. So first one that comes to mind is Data Sync. So Data Sync, let's say if you have a Hadoop system or an SMB or an NFS file system that's on-premises, the way that Data Sync will work is that you deploy an agent on premises and then you give it access to that file system. And then afterwards you create jobs to migrate anyone who's been here, been through a migration project, depending on the size of it or the scale of it, it can be a lot of homework. It can be a lot of work. You can always go the free route. You can always use Robocopy. You can always use rsync. But then all of that project management is on you. What Data Sync brings to the table is that, number one, it is a multi-threaded, performant migration tool that can create jobs on a schedule. You can throttle them down. You can apply multiple agents to any one migration job. So you do have quite a few options when it comes to that. Now, that's for an online migration. Let's say you have an offline migration. Well, that's where the Snow family might come into play, right? So the Snow family is a group of physical devices, right? So these are physical devices that you do go through your Amazon console and you select which one you would like. It is shipped to your location, and depending on the configuration that you'd like, you load the data that you'd like to have into your AWS environment, and then you ship it back, right? So that is for offline migrations, right? So if, let's say, your internet pipe is overloaded, you have too many processes going through it, or let's say your location of where you want to copy the data from is remote, and you don't want to allow or increase the pipe size for the internet through that location, Snow would work well for you.
So, show of hands, or let's see, are you interested in talking about the hybrid solution, the on-premises low latency access, or would you like to talk about building a data lake? Or any particular direction, guys? What's that? Lake? Okay, data lake. We're going data lake. All right.
So S3 has been around for quite some time, right? So when it comes to building a data lake on premises, it really provided some limitations when it comes to the physical capacity that you had on premises, because what happens when you're creating a data lake is that it expands, it grows, it never shrinks, it never goes down. It only creates data upon its own data, right? That's what you're going to eventually do with it. You're going to analyze, you're going to take a look at it, you're going to do exercises against it, and then eventually you're probably going to exercise some kind of business decisions against it. So S3 has been deployed as a true easy to use object storage. And when I say easy to use, I say it's easy to use, but you could possibly have a PhD in S3 and still not understand all the capabilities that it can bring to the table, right? So with that being said, it does offer quite a number of options when you're looking to store and how to store your data and how you're going to access it.
Just I don't know if you're aware of the capability of S3, but there's over 100 trillion objects in S3 today. I think my number's stale, so it's actually more than that. It's enormous. So you as an organization, you have this unstructured data and you're trying to get it to a location that you can glean the insights out of it. That's what S3 is for. And you're going to find the cost overall, once we go through the classes here and we talk about how to use them, to be very attractive as well. And we went down the new data lake route. There's a migrating existing data lakes as well, which is a whole nother conversation here. So I just wanted to insert that.
Yep. So when you're talking about S3, over the years, AWS has figured out ways to bring more of a cost savings platform to customers. So at the same time, that really does kind of complicate it. It makes it so that there's so many options when you're trying to figure out what kind of object class you're going to put your objects in, right? So let's just go through these one by one. Starting off on the left-hand side, we're talking about S3 standard. That's the one that's been around for years and years and years. That's for when you're looking for your millisecond response times, right? Your data is copied across 3 different availability zones. You have so many levels of protection to your data applied to make sure that your data is secure, right? So when you drop an object without selecting an object class, that's where it's going to land, right? S3 standard. Now, I'm going to skip intelligent tiering for now because it makes a lot more sense after I go through the other ones, right? So we're actually going to jump over here to S3 standard IA, infrequent access. So if you have data that you know that you're going to keep for longer than 30 days and you're not going to be accessing it that often, AWS has this object class set up so that you enjoy some benefits, some cost benefits based on that. So the cost is actually less for your less or reduced from S3 standard, right? Then you have S3 one zone infrequent access. Let's say this is data that's a copy of a copy or a copy of a backup or data that is not mission critical to you. This storage class will be beneficial to you in that the protection of it is reduced, right?
Reproducible is another good use case, like thumbnails of images that you could reproduce.
Exactly, right? So anything that could be reproducible, that if anything becomes unavailable, it won't harm your business too much. So if you look over on the left-hand side, you're going to see that the data is copied over 3 availability zones, and the difference over here is that for one zone IA is as the name states, it's only one availability zone, right? Now, moving on to the archival area, the Glacier area. Traditionally, AWS Glacier has been archival in the sense that you do have to go through a secondary process to get your data back. So for the previous storage classes, you access your data and it's instantaneously there, right? It's millisecond response time. For the archival tiers, you do need to go through a restore process and then you wait for the specific amount of time and then you get your data, except for Glacier Instant Retrieval. Glacier Instant Retrieval, although it's part of the archive tier, although it's named Glacier, it is millisecond response time. So it's actually very, very familiar when it comes to standard infrequent access, in that the only thing that you need to do is to understand is that we want you to keep your data for at least 90 days. And then you can benefit from the cost savings that will come from Glacier Instant Retrieval, right? So even though it's part of the archival family, it's not really an archival process. You will use the same commands to access the objects as you would in the previous object classes. Now, Glacier Flexible Retrieval is actually the legacy Glacier, right? Before December, Glacier Instant Retrieval did not exist, right? You all had access to Glacier Flexible Retrieval, which was named to just plain Glacier. So then what happened was that they changed the name to it. They named it Flexible Retrieval, and then the new storage class is now Instant Retrieval.
So audience participation. Has anybody here used GIR yet? The Glacier Instant Retrieval, tested it out. Besides Jay, has anybody else tested it? So has anybody used Glacier before? Have y'all ever stored S3 objects? Okay, so you understand, you have a namespace, you have S3, you have the objects, and Glacier is an offline movement. The objects are lifecycle down and they're stored offline, you have to get them back. Instant retrieval is that archival data, but it's instantly available. Ideal for objects that you may only read once every quarter or two, very rarely. It has a different cost structure with it, and that's how it works, but it's very powerful. Think about that Oracle database backup that you have, or whatever it is. That's not important. It just needs to be there. You have to retain it forever, but that day you need it now. It'll instantly be available. That's what GIR is. Very powerful.
Yep, exactly. So the only difference between the Glacier Flexible Retrieval and Glacier Deep Archive is the amount of time that it's going to take you to restore your data, right? The Deep Archive will have a bigger discount, but Glacier Flexible Retrieval will also carry a heavy discount compared to the starting point, which is S3. Now, you have to learn these if you're looking to take some major benefits off of the data that you're going to put into your data lake, right? How often are you going to access your data? How long you're going to keep it? Those are questions that you need to answer before you start deploying, right? Now, let's say you have a variable rate of access when it comes to your data. You don't know how often you're going to access your data. Let's say your data is accessed by a tertiary application that your customers have access to, and you will never be able to predict as to which object class is perfect for you. That's where we actually double back and go over to intelligent tiering. So intelligent tiering is an object class that will take into account your S3 style access patterns, your infrequent access style access pattern, and your GIR style access patterns. And what it's going to do is it's going to automatically move the object tiered depending on when was the last time it was accessed. How long has this object been in existence? And then you will benefit from that object class. Now, To put into perspective what Kevin said earlier about discounting that is applied to customers, when GIR was announced back in December, it was automatically placed into intelligent tiering, and customers from 1 second to another, without them having to lift a finger, were giving a massive discount because before December, intelligent tiering only had an S3 standard style tier and then also an infrequent access tier. Right. So again, intelligent tiering is for patterns which you cannot predict, or let's say an environment that's just too large to do a massive investigation into, your own access patterns. Now, let's say if you have a good understanding about your own objects, right? The data that you have in play right now. We also have something called lifecycle policy. Lifecycle policy is a way for you to manage manually or through a lifecycle policy, right? Not manually to the object, but for you to set your own date and time frames as to when you would like to move an object to a different storage class. You can set it on a time-based. You can move objects, let's say something that doesn't get access for 90 days, let's move it down to infrequent access. Let's say after 180 days after that, you want to move it down to Glacier Instant Retrieval, well, then you can do so. And there are quite a number of options when it comes to lifecycle policy that's for your own benefit whenever you'd like to take a look as to how you would like to manage the objects and how long you would like to keep them inside your own data lake.
But we're here to talk about data lakes. This is a lot of storage, and that was the route. So let's talk about the benefit of it. So here's a slide that shows you what you can do with the data lake. Yeah, we're storage. We showed you S3. That could be a limitless bucket. You can put billions of objects in there. But then what? Well, we have Redshift, EMR, Athena. There's so many tools in the AWS infrastructure that you can use to glean the data right out of it. Not even just the objects and the tagging and everything. With Athena, you can do SQL-style queries against the content stored inside the objects in S3 in your database. So you have a bunch of JSON files, CSV files, and you want to glean information out of it, pull up Athena, write a command, select a column from whatever, and go to town. You can pull your data out. And so with that, it just opens the door to innovation for your companies. And that's the game changer. So you move the storage to S3 on AWS and you save the company some money. That's great. But now you've opened the door to add value to your company. That's the story at the end.
Yeah, which at the end of the day is one of the major benefits of the cloud, right? Once you get your data onto the cloud, you can actually apply many, many, many other services that AWS offers to make sure that your data is actually taken advantage of to its full potential.
Okay. So that's the data lake story. Which direction would you like to go next? Hybrid. Okay. So hybrid. Let's start off with talking about using cloud stores. Does anybody struggle today with on-premises NASs or on-premises backups that you're trying to get to the cloud, but the latency has become prohibitive? Those kind of situations, or migrations are difficult. We have a few hands going up. Okay, well, we have a few different solutions that come into play to address this. So first of all, this is the Amazon FSx file gateway architecture. The way it works is on premises, you deploy over here. So you deploy a VM or a physical appliance that literally shares out the SMB shares to your environment. In this case, it's very Windows feature rich because it's an FSx for Windows gateway. It is literally mapped back to the FSx for Windows file server in the cloud. So if you have data that you write to the SMB share that is on the gateway with that low latency access, it will be replicated to the FSx for Windows solution that is stored up in Amazon right here. You can also go the other direction. So a very common question, well, I'm doing analytics on the data and I want to persist that back to the on-premises data center. That can be done as well because there's a capability called refresh cache that you can set as low as 5 minutes that will cause the gateway to wake up and do a scan, see what's changed, and pull over the files that have changed. Questions on how that works or any curiosity? You can go deeper if you'd like. We can move on to the next one. This next one's pretty popular. That's the S3 file gateway. Very similar architecture. In fact, it's the same image that you download to deploy it. As I said, VMware Hyper-V KVM. And in this case, you can share out either NFS or SMB on premises, low latency access. So millisecond, 2 milliseconds. In the file world, we have a little different definition of low latency, the block world, but a millisecond, you're doing pretty good. But you're on premises, you have an appliance, you have the SSD drives in it. A lot of the power of it comes from the size of the cache that you have. So you want to size it to match your active working set. So if you have 2 terabytes of data that gets read on a NAS in a given day, you're going to want to size that cache to at least 2 terabytes so that the reads get satisfied from that on-premises cache. That's where we get that low latency connection. So files are cached on the gateway and then persisted to S3 as objects. Permissions get masked. So Ntfs permissions, anybody know how to store Ntfs permissions in an S3 object? Yeah, it's a whole different paradigm there. So what we do is we take the ACL on the Ntfs permission and shove it into the user-defined metadata field in the object. We compress it and we stick it in there. We can't fit as many ACE entries in there, but that's how it gets mapped. And so if your gateway was to be blown away and you put a new one in, that's also how we restore it and pull it back and pull the object world back into the NTFS land. One other feature that's powerful is you can deploy more than one of these gateways. Only one of them can be right at any point in time, but you could have 100 of them. So we have customers with workloads that are distributed around the globe, and so they'll deploy gateways. As long as only one is right and the rest are reads, you could get that cache out there in the different institutions as well. This one's very good for backups, for archives, and for creating data lakes. So it's a popular ingest mechanism. So why would you use one over the other? At the end of the day, it boils down to what you're trying to accomplish with them. Where the Amazon S3 file gateway, it's designed for that native access to S3 objects. The real reason you want to use that is because you're trying to get the data into object for some object use. Whereas on the FSX file gateway, that's the pure Microsoft Windows experience that you're after in that case. It's going to be designed for that workflow and performed very well for anything that is Microsoft focused. All right. So for any of these gateways, only one of them is going to be writable to a target. But what you can do, and I've seen this many times, is you'll take an S3 bucket and you can pin it to a prefix so that each location will have its own prefix as a writer, and they can be authoritative for their prefix and readers on the others. So you can do that as well. And Amazon, we are constantly innovating and building new feature functionality to these products. They change every few months. We are adding features. If you have an idea that it doesn't do today, let us know. We'll put it in the product feature request and it'll get to product if we have enough customers that agree. So we also have a volume gateway. So this will be for replicating block devices. The traditional use case here, let's say you have a database on premises, SQL Server database, and it's a manageable size, and you want to take a snapshot of that database and restore that snapshot up in the EBS. Well, you can use a volume gateway to help you move that, and you can even instrument it to where it's working on a schedule. Maybe every night you take another snapshot of that database and you store it off on the volume gateway, and you have processes in the back end that will restore it into EBS. You literally get a copy of your production database into an EC2 instance at the end of the day with that process. So that can come in handy for DR or other use cases. One that not everyone knows about is the tape gateway. So we also have this is the same image. This can be a virtual or physical device, but it goes into your environment. It integrates into your existing backup infrastructure. And what it does is it presents today 10 iSCSI tape drives, emulates one of the IBM tape drives, and an iSCSI media changer. Integrates with all the modern backup applications, IBM Spectrum Protect, Networker, Net Backup, Veeam, pick your poison there, and it presents itself as tape drives. The backup software is no wiser. What you do with it, though, is you can take your physical tape libraries with your physical tapes And with the same backup software that you have, it doesn't go away. You can clone them, you can move them, or you can write directly to the tape gateway. And what we do is we take the data that's being streamed in and we save it off into Amazon S3, and it can be archived down in the Glacier as a virtual tape. So from your backup application perspective, you see a virtual tape. You don't know that it's stored off in Amazon. And customers are using this today to get rid of tape in their environment. In some cases, have a big bank with multiple petabytes working through it today. And that process can be actually pretty tedious. So we do have partners in that community that help out with this, but they're taking hundreds of thousands of physical tapes that go bad over time. After 10 years, after 20 years, those physical tapes are, the question about reading them comes into play. Well, if you pull it off while you can and you store it in the cloud, it's going to be there. We're going to check it, make sure it's valid. And if you happen to need that data at some point, you can pull it back. Customers have also moved their entire backup environment to run in EC2 as some kind of archival backup environment because they were wanting to get out of that business altogether. Questions so far, guys? Does that make sense on that tape gateway? Sounds like something you could use? You can download this and deploy it by the end of the day like that. If you have enough hypervisor environment and play with it, it's absolutely something that works. And
you can actually deploy this in one VPC to another VPC. If you're looking to go from cloud to cloud, let's say if you'd like to just make sure that you have a storage gateway in one area, but the access endpoint at the other, it is something to keep in mind in case you have a use case for that.
Next slide here, we talk about Amazon S3 File Gateway for archive. It's just a different workflow, but rather than using it for backup, in this case, you're archiving. You're keeping many, many years of retention in this case. You can use cost optimization once the data lands in S3. You can lifecycle it down to the cheapest tier storage that we have. So, all right. That's the hybrid conversation in a nutshell quickly. And again, remember that what it does for the file services, it gives you that low latency access on premises to virtually an unlimited bucket in the case of the S3 gateway. But that way, we have had customers that have moved entire NASs to run on one of these gateways, which it's not a NAS. It doesn't have all the feature enterprise data functionality that a true-blown Isilon or Netapp does, but it's very capable. And if you're starting your journey to the AWS cloud, it's a great place to get your foot in the water.
So if I have an S3 bucket that I've already deployed and I've got 2 terabytes worth of data, do I need to have a 2 terabyte VMFS on that gateway?
So that's a good question. That's about sizing the cache. And the cache gets sized after the first full data migration. The cache gets sized with the data that gets changed. So any writes going to the cache obviously got to be saved there and stored up, and there's an upload buffer for that. But more importantly, data that gets read, because you want the clients that are reading the files that are being served behind the gateway to get that low latency experience. So you size the cache to a point, let's say 2 terabytes in that case, and being engineers, we do 4 terabytes, anybody? Okay, so we went to 4 terabytes. So we have a lot of extra room there. And as your workload grows, and you can keep track of all these metrics, as you get closer, you can grow it. You can keep adding cache disk up until 64 terabytes, and then you roll another gateway. And some of those big genomics customers, they have multiple 64 terabyte caches for what they're doing. And that's all about that active working set in that case. So good engineers, we over allocate, and we like to take baby steps when we grow. So it allows that architecture.
We've actually covered a lot of material here. Does anyone want to go back or have any questions that you'd like to ask?
I assume encryption is kind of available just across the board.
Yes.
Yeah, data in flight, data at rest encryption. Security is job 0 at Amazon, and I'm not kidding you, working internally for a year, it's tight. Security, I don't have access to any of your customer data. I can't even help you by looking at logs. It's extremely tight. Encryption in flight, encryption at rest, depending on which technology that we're working, and it's enabled out of the gate. So for example, with the storage gateway, it comes with the SMB2 encryption turned on out of the gate, which is an immediate performance challenge for people that are not used to it. So they often call me up and I work them through the conversation, and they either lower it down or whatnot. Isilon Netapp, it's disabled by default, just as an example. So that's a case where Amazon, we're going to default to the most secure way to do stuff. And so everything I showed you is absolutely encrypted. And we can get you all the details about the type of encryption and how we're doing it for the different techs if interested. So, yeah. Yes, in the back. Jay has. It is very, very soon. Okay. Let me just say that. So it is something that's been asked by a lot of customers. We heard you loud and clear. It's going to come out real soon. That's all I can say about that. Another question. Yes,
now, actually, before we move on that point, if you do have a Netapp on premises that you'd like to migrate onto AWS, even go onto FSx for Netapp, you can actually just snap mirror it all the way onto it. And if you're familiar with snap mirror, you know that it's super easy and it's the same exact way that you'd manage it on premises that you would inside the FSx line.
But, okay. So in that case, you're going to want to use Data Sync is absolutely, once it's certified, will absolutely work. You have Robocopy. There's a whole suite. Yep.
I think we had another question around there.
Yes.
You mentioned a tool to analyze my S3 storage and access how I use it.
S3 storage lens. So if you go into the S3 console, there should be a pop-up in there talking about it, and go ahead and enable it by default. It is free to use. I think it's 15 metrics that you get, 14, 15 metrics out of the gate. Very useful. What's that?
The free ones are 15, right? And then the free version does have an option for you to be able to export it also. Yeah. So if you want to export it into its own bucket and just keep the data, just to have some kind of historical logs, you can do so. And that's all free. The paid version gives you a lot more in-depth granular data that you're going to be looking at, how many objects, how many multi-part uploads that have failed, so on and so forth. It's very in-depth, right? But the free one does give you a very, very good working set of tools to give you a pretty high level, view into what's going on in your S3 environment.
And one catch is the free version. You get 14 days worth of retention for data, so you can see what's happening in the past 14 days. That's useful.
But you can export it.
Huh?
But you can export it.
But you can export it. Yeah. So he's getting tricky. You can export it. But the paid version, you can go much further. I forget how long. So yep. Yeah. Great question. This is your time, guys. We got about 5 minutes. Any questions are fair game. We got a lot of smart people in this room too. So nothing else yet. So okay.
Did we cover all of them?
We did not go down into backup so much.
Got one question.
If we leverage direct connect lines from our on-prem, is there any special gateway or endpoint that we need to deploy?
Yeah, so depending on the product, if we're talking about storage gateways, there's a private link connection that you can set up. You can always go through a public endpoint coming in, but customers don't want to do that, so they have DX. And you just set up a VPC endpoint in your VPC, and that becomes a private link connection. You got to have the plumbing in place networking wise to work with it. And then you can go from a private RC 1819 network to another one inside here. It doesn't see the public IPs ever from end to end, and that does work. So there's a blog out there on that. So if you search in your favorite web browser for storage gateway and DirectX or maybe endpoint, you'll find that, or just email me or whatever, I'll get it to you. So it's a little involved in the setup, but once you see it, it's like, oh, that's it. Okay. Question.
Any?
For the virtual tape libraries, is that data immutable or what's the air gap?
So the data by itself is not immutable unless you store it in a location that has immutability to it. The tape gateway today writes to S3 on the back end and can be enabled with object lock. But I believe that there's some additional functionality coming later this year that's going to do much more of what you're talking about. So it depends on how you configure it. So it can be. How's that?
You can do work tapes with tape
Yeah,
gateway.
work tapes with object lock. Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Good question.
So we can touch on backups.
Yeah.
But we are running a little bit low on time.
Okay, let's see. Get down here. Okay, that's not where I wanted to be. Let's talk about some of these closing slides here, guys. Just real fast, I don't know if you know about this. We have AWS Skill Builder out there. This is free to the world. Anybody can sign up and take these courses. There's over 500 of free courses on there. There is a certification at the end of it, and you can get a badge. And I went through and did the object one recently. It's not a joke. You get good education out of it. It's not like you're going through and answering our marketing questions. You're going through and actually learning some tech. Today we have the object and we have the block badge available. We have a file one coming out. We have a couple others we'll talk about. And then AWS certifications. So the AWS certifications are industry recognized. They're also not simple to get, depending which one you're after. And we have a whole suite, though, depending what you're looking for. Here's the link to the storage learning badges. As I mentioned, we have object block and file coming out. And we're also coming out with a data protection, disaster recovery, and data migration storage badge. So if you're interested in sharpening the saw in these particular areas, it's worth looking at. And again, no cost to you. Also, we have another session here, another storage session. This is the transfer family session. Russ Boyer, who is the transfer family service SA, he's the smartest guy about this product I know, besides the engineers, and Kevin Schwartz are going to be presenting this, STG201. Highly recommended if you have an interest in MFT, transfer family, anything there above. So please do come and check that out. It's tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. And that concludes this session.